You can begin.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. And my name is Adnan Ramkan Beno. I'm the director of MC Academy. Now, on behalf of MC Academy, I would like to welcome you all to this webinar, which is the third in a series of webinars dedicated to technology, innovation, and the law. Now, today's webinar, as you see from the flyer, is does blockchain offer a new paradigm in the legal world? In other words, the way I see it, what's meant by it is that what impact blockchain technology is making and will make on the conception and the practice of the law as we know it. It is, at least from my perspective, a fiendishly complex, but nonetheless a very important topic. I really must confess at the start that I have been trying very, very hard to grasp the nature and working of blockchain technology, but so far to no avail. I'm sure there are other people who are in the same position or the same kind of place. Now, the challenge to you, our speakers, is to try to assist in lifting some of the fogs, the fog that surrounds blockchain's relevance to and impact on the conception of law, and also its impact on the way we practice law nowadays. Now, to moderate the discussion, we have the larger-than-life Dr. Reimann, who does not need any introduction, except to say that we are very much grateful to Carsten for his contribution and support to MC Academy. Without further ado, I will hand over to Carsten to steer and run the webinar. And I think, Carsten, you need to finish exactly in 1 hour, and that's why I've been very short. Thank you very much indeed.
Very much. Thank you very much. I'm absolutely excited to have a great, I would say, world-class panel of experts. It's really great, guys, that you joined us today. I'm here with my colleague Niovi. Niovi is working at MC Academy currently on blockchain and at the intersection of data protection. So she's actually knowledgeable in the detail as well. So we set this up together and will try to navigate us through it all together. Just by way of introduction, we have, again, 3 continents for speakers. We have from the US, no, sorry, I'll start with the ladies first, of course. We have from London, Letizia Seglar, you're a blockchain and fintech expert working for the European Commission. Then we have from South Africa, Nerushka Bowen. Thank you for joining us for the second. We're a fan of yours, so you already came back today. You're an expert on legal tech as well. Then we have David Fisher, who is the founder and CEO of Integra, blockchain company, and David will tell us in a few moments a bit more about this. And I'm very pleased also to welcome Brian Kuhn. I think you're one of the blockchain celebrities worldwide, going from continent to continent. You're the co-leader, global co-leader of the cognitive legal business of IBM, and you're a close friend of somebody calling himself Watson, if I understood it correctly. So let's just jump directly into things. As Adnan said, we have a complex matter here, which is not as easy to understand as a tangible object, as a computer, a cup of coffee, or even a usual software. David, would you like to start and give us, in very simple words, I know you can make the complex very simple, a quick explanation or a more elaborate, but how would I tell, for example, my parents who are 80 years old now, or my young kids who are just at the moment of asking me, what is blockchain? How would you describe this to a non-expert? David, can you hear it? Yeah, good.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Perfect. So a blockchain is a distributed ledger or a distributed database. And what that means, I mean, if you imagine for a moment that you have a spreadsheet of just sequential transactions, you know, like a bank account, for example, So you have a ledger like that, but imagine that everyone in the world has that same spreadsheet, that same copy. The blockchain software, the software that runs the blockchain, critical part of that is an ability to replicate your ledger, or that ledger you have on your computer, to every computer. A consequence of that is when I want to send $100 or 100 euros to you, Carsten, that appears in one ledger, but then it's copied to every other copy of that ledger around the world. So a consequence of that is you have what's called consensus in the state of the database. So everyone has a copy of this ledger. And so rather than relying on a central authority, for example, a government, or a bank, or the Department of Motor Vehicles where you get a driver's license, or a passport agency, rather than relying on one intermediary to hold all the data and be the reference and authority for that data, everybody has a copy of that data. And so it's basically trust in the network rather than trust in one institution. So that's one part of it. And there's obviously encryption involved. There are a whole bunch of interlocking technologies that make it function. But the fundamental idea is you have trust through the distributed and replicated nature of the database rather than trust in a central institution.
Thank you, David. Are we on? Okay. Thank you, David. Brian, maybe can you, you're the master of technology. Can you tell us a bit how this actually works, if it's possible to tell it a bit? I mean, chaining blocks and blocking change, I think we understand the basic concept. Is there anything, how can you describe it from a technical point of view?
Can you, there I go, I'm unmuted. So I'll describe it from a practical point of view. Think about a supply chain scenario. Supply chain scenarios tend to repeat themselves from a blockchain perspective. And imagine pairing a supply chain scenario with an Internet of Things scenario. And by that I mean a small device that reports out to the internet. So in this scenario, you have a grocery store. And this grocery store has branches all over Belgium. And this grocery store sources produce from multiple different farms throughout Europe. And suddenly there's a problem. Some of the produce is bad. It's not clear what farm it came from, and people get sick. And the grocery store has to pull and destroy a particular type of vegetable or fruit and lose millions of euros potentially. Now, if it were possible to attach a device, an Internet of Things device, to the shipping containers that the produce was shipped in to the grocery store locations, and it was possible to track every step of the process through the supply, the already established supply chain process. So the produce is scanned at one location, scanned in another location, and each time it slots through a process that reports to a blockchain network and becomes an immutable, changeless audit trail of where that produce has been at any given time. And so now, if going forward someone becomes ill because of a similar scenario, it's possible to trace back where there was a broken link in the chain by auditing that chain. And now imagine applying that scenario to data, to big data, to all the data that we're drowning in and making use of today. Data is, no question, profoundly important to all of us, also profoundly risky. From an artificial intelligence perspective, it's garbage in, garbage out, no matter how good the AI is. So verifying that data becomes as important as verifying produce for society going forward in many, many ways.
Ryan, is there anything you want to add, Nirushka or Letizia? I'm not quite sure if you all got a perfect sound quality so far. We had a bit trouble here right at the start, but it's getting better apparently. Letizia, is there something you want to add, or do we leave the definition? Maybe just try to give the word to Letizia.
Yes, I would like to add, and may I correct you? Actually, I don't work for the European Commission. I am an independent expert to them, so I'm not actually an employee. I'm an policy and give what's happening in the, just so the compliance and legal people are happy. In terms of my addition to the definition of blockchain and its use cases, I think what we should think about from a practical point of view is that it's an infrastructure in the same way that the internet is an infrastructure, and we can layer various use cases, various protocols on top of that infrastructure. So at the moment, you know, blockchain, DLT, it sounds very academic to many people. But if we think about how the internet works and how all this information is distributed across various systems around the world, you know, DLT is quite similar in that sense. The only difference is how that information is controlled and how that information is dispersed, and also how value can now also be, you know, exchanged around the world. So I think if we start thinking about it in the same way that we think of the internet as an infrastructure, then, you know, it's a bit more tangible, it's a bit more real to people.
Anything else? I think we have a nice description from a couple of angles already to this phenomenon, I would say. Is there anything, Rushka, you missed so far? We the colleagues haven't touched.
Just to add maybe one analogy that has helped me kind of grasp the true potential of blockchain is this analogy of the way the internet kind of changed the way we share information. So it kind of went from physical posts, for example, where it took days for information to transfer between two individuals. And then we developed something called email, where now, you know, in a matter of seconds, information is shared across the globe, which then became photographs, which is now video. And that's kind of how the internet has changed the way we deal with each other. Then if now we add the blockchain on top of the internet, as I say, an infrastructure layer, this is now moving to sharing value over the internet. And it's something we weren't able to do before blockchain. So if we look, a simple example, trying to attribute ownership to a PDF document. If I email somebody an attachment with a PDF to it, there's nothing preventing them from emailing that to another 100 people, and everybody has a copy of this. Let's just say it was a piece of art in a PDF document. There's no way of attributing who created that PDF document, who owns it, and, you know, who have I sold it to. But if we can now put something like that onto a blockchain, for example, that there's now this record available that can show these various transactions on the internet. And we've now seen this example with things like cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin, where we're sharing value in the form of money on the internet. And now we're starting to see all these new use cases on the blockchain, which is quite exciting. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I think Mr. Kuhn would actually like to contribute.
Yeah, can you tell us a bit, you know, is the blockchain still evolving, or how mature is it? How stable, or because there's a lot of people discussing about, you know, is this close to the market? Is this 5 years ahead? What's the stage of the technology?
It's happening now, but there are different approaches to blockchain, just like there were different approaches to video, different internet protocols once upon a time. Different Blu-ray, you had, in terms of media, you had Blu-ray, you had DVDs, etc. There's something very fundamentally important, though, that I think we should discuss, and it's this. There are a lot of potentially profoundly impactful blockchain use cases. But you can't do anything with those use cases unless you have a blockchain network. And there is no one mothership blockchain. You have to go out and establish a network, just like you have to go out and establish an electrical grid. And then you can think of the blockchain use cases as appliances that you plug into that electrical grid. Your microwave, your refrigerator, your toaster. But you need to build a consortium. You need to build a network. And there's a methodology, a good one, around how you might go about that. You cannot just buy blockchain solutions. Most blockchain networks mimic networks of business that are already in place. So for example, if I am going to purchase a car, there's a business network between the car dealership, the leasing company, the bank, the repair shop, etc. Everybody who participates in the business function of selling and maintaining a motor vehicle, they would all benefit from parity of information to some degree. So we look at existing business networks and ask ourselves, how can we amplify these with blockchain? How can we improve them with transparency, with trust, and with real-time access to information? The network element is very important. Oftentimes we talk a lot about what can be done with blockchain from a use case perspective without discussing the fundamental necessity of the first step, which is a network. Thanks.
More interactive here. Somebody joined from the Middle East, as I understand it, and is asking us if it's really as secure as we are told it is. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about privacy, and I think we'll come to this later in the legal application bit. But can you tell us a bit about give us your personal idea of this discussion? How safe can blockchain be, or is it compared to what we're using now? David, maybe you go ahead.
Got it. Yeah, I think it's discussing the safety and security of blockchain is not unlike discussing the safety and security of the internet. I mean, it really depends. I mean, if you, for example, you have an open network in your home and you give access to your disk drive with all of its files, then the internet is not very secure for you, right? If, on the other hand, you have a firewall and you have encrypted your disk drive and you've taken steps to secure your information, then the internet is secure for you. So in the case of blockchain, I mean, you do have this issue of replicated information, and so that changes the way you might think about it. So there's a question of how much information to actually put on blockchain, right? So I mean, if you're writing to that ledger that I described that's going to be distributed throughout the world, you have to make a choice about how you're representing that information. You could put an entire document unencrypted on it, in which case the entire world could see it. You can encrypt that document and place that on blockchain. You could not put the document at all on blockchain and instead represent it as a hash of the information, which is just an algorithmic way of representing large amounts of data with a single size string. Or ultimately, you could put no information at all and just use blockchain as a ledger of random numbers, referencing things that only you know. So I think the security of it is really open to interpretation. You definitely have to make certain choices that are a little different than the internet. With respect to encryption per se, so to the extent that you do want to put valuable information actually on a blockchain, it has to be remembered that this is an unchangeable sequential ledger. And so even if the technology does not exist today, that potentially could break that encryption. you have to factor in the likelihood that the day may come when someone can, to break that. And so it's not like you can just take that information down. Once it's written there forever. For that reason, you have to take extra care in deciding and this is especially true in the legal industry, where there is so much privileged and private information. And I'll tell you that for the Integra Ledger blockchain that we operate under the context of the Global Legal Blockchain Consortium, we generally recommend not putting documents or information, even encrypted, on blockchain, unless you're very comfortable with those one day becoming public. And so we're mostly focused on hashes and digital representations of the data without actually putting the data on. One final point, in terms of security, it's pretty well known that the Bitcoin blockchain in particular, which is the oldest public blockchain, has never been hacked, and that's different than encrypted information. So it's one thing to obfuscate the information on blockchain. It's another thing to potentially corrupt a system or corrupt a database. And this is one key aspect of blockchain that's very intriguing. And that is, if you have all records with one central authority, a bank, a government, that sort of thing, you have a central point of failure. And you read about this from time to time, where a hacker gets into the Equifax, credit bureau servers, and once they break in, they have access to everything. They can change things. With a distributed ledger, Carsten, if I were to break into your computer, try to change something, the fact that 10,000 other people have a copy of that data means that after I try to tamper with yours, it won't agree with the other 10,000 computers on the network, and the change will be rejected. And so in that sense, blockchain is profoundly secure. And I would argue far more secure than current systems. But that's different than encrypting information in privacy.
David, now I think that was a good start on what blockchain is and how does it work. I think we should move now into the next level and specifically focus on how can blockchain be applied in the legal sector. And I think it's always nice to have examples. I know that Letizia has been working on a project. She is willing to share with us an example in the legal sector. Letizia, would you like to share a bit what you told us before on what you have there as your project?
Yes, sure. So because I still work in the industry, I'm still a practitioner in the industry. I still work with corporate clients, and one of my corporate clients, which is a bank, they have been working now to digitalize their contracts for their procurement facilities. And basically, for anybody who works in procurement, it's quite a tedious process. You have to submit tenders, and once the tenders are successful, then you draw up the legal document. And it's, although very mundane, it's very repetitive and really time consuming. And actually a lot of the information contained within a tender or contained within a service level agreement is actually very mundane and very factual information, but it's presented in a human readable format. So what the banking client has done, what I've helped them to do, is to work with a big IT supplier and who has a blockchain as a service business. And basically, we have tried to standardize the process of procuring goods and services. So in the old state, what would happen is what I described in terms of, people sitting down, writing tenders, sending the tender across. If it's then successful, then they write the legal contract and they go back and forth writing the legal contract. So that is the old state, and that is the human readable format. In this machine readable format, what we now have is we have the tender documentation, which has machine readable information, factual information, such as, what is the tender size, what is the equipment or the goods that will be provided, what is the cost of them, at which volume, and all of this information is sent in a machine-readable format via the blockchain, which is a private blockchain network, and it's permissioned with the various agents or the various gatekeepers and administrators who have permission to act for both sides of the both the procuring company and the supplier. And basically, once that information matches each other, such as the factual information, then it takes out the repetitive process of having to each time, so every quarter, for example, where they need to procure the goods again, instead of going through the legal process all over again, you then have a smart contracts function which reads the information and verifies the information to make sure that it matches the input that both parties put in place. And once that matches, and once the goods are received within the warehouse, then the contract is actually settled and payment is made. So this has been running now for 6 months, so it's still in test phase. We still have some, nuances that need to be taken care of, but it's just an example of how, although it's a very mundane example or a very standardized example, it's an example of how some of the legal processes within an organization can actually be standardized and automated, so that the legal department can actually be deployed in more meaningful or more how can I say in more engaging legal activities, such as interpretation of contracts rather than the settlement of contracts.
Titia.
Thank you. So we would like to ask now Ms. Narushka to discuss with us a bit the advantages that it could have, blockchain could have, especially for the legal sector, and also just an opinion on why is there so much hype of blockchain on the financial sector and not so much on the legal sector.
Sure. So I think over the last few years, definitely we've seen a lot of the hype in the financial services sector, especially from the banks and even the regulators within the financial services sector. Just to share a quick use case with you on that front, 2 days ago, actually, the South African Reserve Bank launched this document called Project Coca, which is, they actually live tested on Tuesday in front of our audience, interbank settlement with a number of the largest banks in South Africa live on a blockchain, just to show the actual potential of this to even disrupt the central banking infrastructure of this country, and of course of any country, to show that that was possible. And this is now coming from the financial services regulators, who are so aware of the disruption that blockchain is bringing with it. Some of the reasons for that, I think the first, obviously, use case for blockchain was Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency which is, at the center of the financial services industry. And, a lot of the people who come from a very sociological, philosophical point of view about Bitcoin and blockchain almost see Bitcoin as disrupting all the intermediaries, including financial institutions like central banks and banks. And that's kind of why banks were first to look into this and research it and say, okay, how do we stay relevant going into the future? But now, as the use cases are expanding way beyond financial services, you're seeing everything from real estate, insurance, even the oil industries. Everybody's now coming together and saying, what other applications can we use this powerful technology for us? And now, looking at law, I think even the legal industry is now, at least in the last 12 months, starting to pay attention. I know just a few years ago, there were very few lawyers talking about this topic and even understanding what is this technology, whereas now we're definitely seeing growth in that area. And I think that the opportunities for the legal industry is twofold. The one is obviously on the client side. Everybody's clients are looking at these projects, and if you as a lawyer cannot have an intelligent conversation with your client about blockchain technology, about distributed ledger technology, and understand how to adapt your services to be able to draft the contracts and provide the regulatory advice required, then you will become irrelevant as a lawyer to your client, and they will go and find somebody who does understand the tech. On the flip side, even in the delivery of legal services, there's now this thing called smart contracts, which was alluded to earlier. And smart contracts is really going to be disruptive in the legal field, because it's kind of evolving the way we think about contracts. Contracts for us, is this document that's signed by two parties and sits in a cupboard somewhere, taken out when there's a fight between the two. But now this concept of smart contracts is saying, let's actually take some of these clauses in the contract and code them and put them on a blockchain, and they become self-executing. And the transactions record themselves into this ledger between the parties, and kind of settle what's going on between the parties wherever they might be in the world. And now, if lawyers are not going to adapt to become legal engineers of the future to build these smart contracts, then they are also cutting themselves out of the market, because clients will go and find somebody who can build these systems and who understand these systems. So for me, the opportunities are twofold, but it does require upskilling from the legal industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Nirushka. Just mentioning contracts. If we understand it correctly, these contracts, are multi-jurisdictional contracts, like a framework of contracts. And if they're self-executing, which law do I put in such a contract? If just say we have a contract between South Africa, the US, and Belgium, for example, right? So US is a bit tricky at the moment, but let's keep it to South Africa and Belgium. So is there a need to choose a specific national, just to get it further, jurisdiction at all, or is this something which will create a body of law in itself, the blockchain standard requirements or whatever? We see this in eBay a lot currently, which produces their own, so to say, simplified civil laws. What is your opinion on that?
So, we already have many contracts in the traditional sense that are crossing borders. And what happens most often is the parties between themselves decide this jurisdiction's law is the one that's going to apply to our entire agreement, because it just makes everything easier. When you have multiple laws applying, it does always end up in a mess. However, blockchain does make things a little bit more complicated, and some people are actually suggesting new ways of approaching this. So if you look at maritime law, for example, in the shipping industry, the jurisdictions are dealt with a little bit differently, and they're saying perhaps something like that needs to apply when we get into this world of blockchain, because it is not as straightforward as the traditional form of contracts we're looking for. But these are questions that are still being debated.
Carsten?
David.
Yes. So I'd like to clarify a few things about smart contracts, because the two areas of hype, I think the word was, are in blockchain are cryptocurrencies and then smart contracts. And just to clarify, it's our view that smart contracts are not going to be disrupting the legal industry anytime soon. And the reason for that is smart contracts, and they're very poorly named, I think, especially in the context of the legal industry, the way people understand contracts. So a smart contract in a blockchain context right now is really just a block of code that effectively is, if this happens, if X happens, then do Y. So by way of example, I think Leticia made that example. So if the product is received in the warehouse, then release payment, right? I think most attorneys would not look at that and say, wow, there's a lot of legal work there. There's not, and she's right. That's a very simple use case, and there would be a contract that would govern millions of products like that. What she was describing was simplification of the payment mechanism based on some operation. And that's where, and that's why the financial services industry has gotten way out in front of this, because their business is moving money around. And per my explanation of moving from a single ledger to a distributed ledger, the notion that everyone can trust the movement of digital money holds promise of tremendous efficiency. So the smart contracts most commonly are describing just the code that's governing basically the simultaneous or automated execution, when something's being transferred. In terms of the legal industry and the way the legal industry understands contracts, contracts are 10 pages or 100 pages, and there are many clauses in there, from choice of law to arbitration provision. There's a lot of social construction in a legal contract. Most of that cannot be easily distilled to contract code in the sense of a smart contract. And so we're many, many, many years away, we think, from true automation of the contract ecosystem beyond the most simple transactions. Now, I think both Brian and Narushka both mentioned blockchain for data. If you think about the legal industry, the currency of the legal industry, isn't money. It's data, right? It's the written product. And so I think in the application of blockchain to law, beyond advising clients potentially on how certain things are coded, applying this notion. So if digital currency can be confirmed to be unique as it moves from person to person, what about data? What about that written contract? So if you have a contract between, say, 10 parties, and there are 10 copies of it and 10 signatures, there is no intrinsic value in one of those documents, right? And back to a banking example, you have a bank and it gives you a bank statement, and if you mail that bank statement to 10 different parties, there's nothing very special about the fact you photocopied that statement and sent it to 10 people. There is no value in that statement. But in a distributed ledger in a blockchain, you actually could have that contract move from person to person and maintain authenticity and integrity in that, such that that contract now has intrinsic value because you can trust it, because of the trust, the trust in the network. And so I think what we're going to see sooner than smart contracts, the way they're currently used in the financial services business and supply chain and other industries, will be making contracts more computable. In other words, if you can trust the data in that contract, and you can start to identify portions of it that you can trust, then you can start to perform operations on that legacy legal contract. Maybe it's not automated execution, because these are still too complex and too many social constructs. But I think you'll start to see, and we've actually done some work on this, legacy contracts that start to become more functional, even if they aren't fully automated in the sense of distilling it to pure computer code.
Thank you, David. We focused on contracts now. Just for a moment, can we think of any other areas in which blockchain can be applied? For example, what I read a lot about the areas first where there's no privacy required. Like for example in real estate, where you put all your ownership records out in the open. For example, we know that Estonia, they go around in Europe very much and tell everybody that they're very progressive because they got rid of their notaries at all, because everything is now on the public record. This is I think for me it's a tangible example. We have other examples, for example in trademark law. Why not have a public register there instead of a central authority? I think we're coming back all the time to this topic. Do we need a central guy telling everybody and passing on the trust by recognizing everybody, or can we actually decentralize the trust and put it back in the network? Now, what is your what is your idea? Is it just some creative thoughts? Would there be, maybe the legal colleagues a bit more from the legal sector? Are there any more areas? I think we mentioned contracts, trademarks, real estate, anything else which we've forgotten so far, which can be impacted or is likely to be impacted by this technology?
Yes. So this is Letitia. I went to a really interesting seminar recently where there was a technologist talking about how actually blockchain technology and DLT is transforming the art world in terms of not only digital art, but in terms of physical art as well. And what they are able to do, just to give you, just high level what they're doing is giving digital watermarks and fingerprints to each and every piece of art that a gallery is exhibiting or that they purchase. And then they're keeping a decentralized catalog of all of these art pieces. And as these art pieces are transferred around the world, because, for example, a museum in China may want to borrow or hire some of the artwork in the Guggenheim in New York. But how do you keep that trail and that integrity that this is a genuine article and it hasn't been interfered with, during its passage from New York to China? So by embedding things like digital watermarks and fingerprints, you are able to keep the integrity of that piece of art. And then this can also be transferred in the wider market in terms of new art pieces that are being created by artists now, so that in terms of their copyright and in terms of when their work is shared, either digitally or physically, they are getting the rights, they are being paid their rights for their artwork being used. So I thought that was a really interesting use case, because I think that the legal sector is quite confounded about things like copyright law and intellectual property law, and maybe this is also an opportunity to apply blockchain and various technologies, not only blockchain, but artificial intelligence, deep reason, etc., in order to understand where the origins of a piece of art or a piece of creative output has come from.
Thank you. It was a new example was new to me. A very interesting example, I think. Now we have David here and Brian. David, founder of the Global Blockchain Consortium for the legal sector. So I think this is your. I'm burning to learn from you, because you had a vision, or you have a vision actually, what blockchain can and should do in the legal industry. Now, would you like to give us a bit of your idea behind it and the way you see how to move this forward?
Yeah, and I want to just summarize what everyone's discussed. I mean, what we keep coming back to is that blockchain is a technology of trust. So it's trusting authenticity. It's trusting provenance. It's rather than trusting central authority, you can trust peers in the network. That's the foundational issue. If you can trust the data, if you can trust that digital data, whether it's currency, whether it's a contract, whatever it is, it allows you to now transact in whatever that means. So legally, financially, otherwise, with that counterparty without an intermediary. And so this is going to impact every industry. So it's art, it's supply chain, it's banking, you name it. So again, if you think about the legal industry, it's all data. And right now, there is no way to truly trust data between counterparties. So that's lawyers and their clients, clients to other clients, so on and so forth. So our vision in the Global Legal Blockchain Consortium is focused on standards for how data is represented, authenticated, and confirmed. That's the foundational issue. As soon as you solve that, then all the functional possibilities start to blossom. But there's one in particular that most people have not thought about or talked about too much. And I think it may end up being in my opinion, the killer app in the next few years with blockchain, and Brian can comment more on that.
That's quite a statement. That's your pressure. Yes. So, and it is the intersection of AI and blockchain for legal. Certainly AI is here, and it's certainly here when it comes to the legal space. But there is a problem, and the problem is, no matter how good an AI algorithm is, no matter how good a machine learning algorithm is, the garbage in, garbage out problem remains. How can you trust the training data? Because if you train an if you train a machine learning algorithm on bad data, the algorithm is going to be brilliant at surfacing insights. Those insights will be flawed. So how do you avoid training a tool on fake news? How do you avoid that? And by verifying the data, first off, is how you do that. Producing AI that is much more efficacious, and also producing larger training sets for AI, which in turn results in better AI. So right now, AI thinks like the individual lawyers and data scientists who train it. Being able to apply verified data will change everything. And I'm thinking about GDPR, and I'm thinking about forgive me, I believe it's Article 21. Machine learning and the need for a human being, or you can request that a human being explain how a machine learning algorithm works. I believe that that's impossible. It's as impossible as me telling you how my neurons are producing the thoughts and my subjective experience. It's impossible, but we might be able to get close to it by verifying the way that a machine learning algorithm functionally is trained and what data it's trained on, and produce an audit trail of that.
And Brian, if I could just jump in for 1 second, this is the reason I think this is so significant.
Oh, you're muted.
AI is incredibly powerful, and it's racing forward, and there's immense investment in it. But imagine a situation, and this is starting to happen, where you have a self-driving car, right? A Tesla, that type of thing, gets into an accident, and we're already seeing this. And there's an argument over whether the car was on autopilot or whether it was being driven by the driver. Furthermore, if it was on autopilot, was it a flaw in the artificial intelligence guiding the car? Like, how do you know? Do you trust Tesla? Who do you trust? And I mean, this is where Brian and I have done a lot of work, and why I asked him to weigh in on this. Ultimately, if you cannot trust the data, and remember, blockchain is a technology of trust. If you can't trust the data, ultimately, you cannot trust the AI. And if you can't trust the AI, that's going to cause tremendous problems, especially legally. Imagine going into court to try to litigate, that accident of that self-driving car. Who do you depose? Do you depose the software engineer? How do you verify the state of the algorithm? There's no way to do it. This could actually, without blockchain, it's our belief that AI, especially in its application in the legal industry, which is racing forward as well, innovation will be halted simply because no one's going to be able to trust both the data that's going in as well as the algorithms that govern it. So we think blockchain, for all the wonderful things it does in simple transactions, and we think ultimately it empowers the most complex transactions.
Okay, thank you. Maybe if we just go back, we have a bit of time left. We go back now from what we heard, the advantages and possible applications of blockchains, to what that means to us, the last living lawyers, so to say. Is this forcing us in any way to innovate, or what would you say What can we do now to brace ourselves, to prepare ourselves, to get familiar? What is our role in education, for example? I know Nirushka is very much active in the educational fields and with startups as well. Nirushka, what would you say? What can we do actually to keep up or to understand or to prepare ourselves for the new technology?
I think we have to embrace the opportunities, and definitely upskilling is something that's a non-negotiable. I think we can't just sit back and say, oh, we don't understand this technology, we've never used it before, therefore we have to ignore it. And I think the three key opportunities potentially for lawyers to reinvent themselves, one would be to provide clarity to both clients and even to assist regulators. I think if you even look right now globally, there's no real unanimity between regulators as to the nature of things like crypto assets, things like ICOs, things like cryptocurrencies. Everybody's creating different ways of approaching these things. And we're also trying to take existing regulations that regulated an old world and try to pigeonhole the new world into those boxes. And I think there's also a way for lawyers to start thinking a bit differently about regulatory frameworks and look at frameworks and guidelines as opposed to very specific legislation that we used to. And it's up to us as lawyers to create that new way of thinking. Another thing is, with any new technologies, there's always new risks involved. Anything digital, you have these digital risks. So although the blockchain can be seen as a secure technology, it's not free from risks. There are always these entry points and exit points that carry a lot of risk. One example is the cryptocurrency exchanges. Maybe the underlying technology is foolproof, but the exchange that facilitates our interaction with the technology may be the part that's at risk and where we can suffer great losses. And how do we mitigate against that? The third area of opportunity, I would say, is the point where the physical world meets the digital world. And that's something called an oracle in the blockchain world, where you actually need some almost like an intermediary, somebody trustworthy, like a notary, for example, who can verify that assets in the physical world are actually what they say they are when we want to peg them back into the digital world, onto the blockchain. And maybe that's another space for lawyers to reinvent themselves. One use case that we haven't mentioned yet that I think is also quite important is that of digital identities. And there's a lot of work being done in that space, a lot of startups trying to solve the problem of digital identity. And I think we've seen, especially on the privacy side, people are looking for ways to take back control over their digital identities. We've had issues with the Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica scandals and all of those things. And how do we in the digital world actually control our own identities? And I think that's an interesting space to also look at. Thanks.
Letitia, you're working close with the European regulator, so I think you'll be the best person to answer the question we're just getting from Adnan here. Why is the policymaker actually? What's at the stake for them? Is it just watch it and be careful what's going to happen, or what's the chances, or from your work actually you're doing, are you observing, or why should a policymaker be interested in this phenomenon? So can you regulate it? Can you observe this? What's the position there, your experience?
Yeah, sure. I think in terms of regulation, we should split that into, looking at blockchain as a technology itself, as an infrastructure itself, and how that can be regulated. And then separately looking at things like cryptocurrencies, tokens, etc., which is, another topic on its own. So I won't discuss necessarily cryptocurrencies, because I think there are both at the macro level in terms of the European Commission itself, and also in other jurisdictions, such as in Switzerland, where they've provided their stance on how they feel about cryptocurrencies and a framework about that. So I think that's a separate subject to what we are discussing. with regards to blockchain itself, with regards to the technology itself, the stance very much is that it's here to stay, and it offers a lot of opportunity to actually transform and digitalize many processes, or improve and enhance many processes. So the Commission is active in terms of the market. It supports, blockchain both from a corporate level, but also at SME level. And I think this is, for me, one of the most interesting things is that there are policies that are trying to encourage SMEs to also adapt and adopt the blockchain technology in terms of the way that they operate, such as in agriculture, certain industries like maritime, like supply chain. So the Commission has a positive stance towards blockchain technology and is actively investing in blockchain technology in terms of whether it's through financial instruments such as grants to companies that have in terms of how it. So I think there's quite a lot of opportunity, and there's quite a lot of enhancements that will come out in the very near future. But I think the space to watch is really where SMEs are involved, because this is 99% of the market. It's not all being taken up by corporates, such as the IBMs, etc., such as the banks, but it's actually certain industries or certain sectors of the industries, that need to adopt this technology the most, and the Commission is making its best effort to give access to those industries and to those segments as well.
Thank you very much. Now, Brian, just quoting Brian, you said it's happening now. We have to close today's discussion, which I think was very intense. And thank you very much for joining. Could you all give a quick one sentence, let's say, message to the legal world, lawyers and blockchains, guys? What should you watch out for? One sentence from you after this discussion, maybe a final greeting message, if you like. Brian, would you start? It's happening now.
Law firms, pay attention to what your clients are doing. Study it.
Okay, I think we lost the audio there a bit. David, are you up to your message?
Yes. I would say yes to everything everyone else has said. And if you're an attorney anywhere in the world, look at joining the Global Legal Blockchain Consortium, which is it's a good starting point. We're working on global standards for the application of blockchain specifically in the legal industry, not supporting other industries, but the legal industries, and that's legalconsortium.org.
Thank you. That was short and sweet. Letitia, your say.
I'm sorry. Could you please turn on your audio, please?
Yeah, now we hear you. Now.
Yes. So I would say for lawyers, for the legal sector, there's always a lot of hype which can make people feel scared about their jobs and their roles. But as such, we don't have any technology which is as intelligent as human beings. And whilst we may be able to automate some very mundane and standard processes, we still need lawyers. We still need, the human intelligence of lawyers. So my advice to lawyers is to think about, what mundane things or what very sticky areas of your sector can you automate, and therefore free yourselves up to, use the legal interpretation and that intelligence that you have as lawyers. And it may be things like using smart contracts. It may be things like codifying certain elements of contracts. But the real interpretation, lies in lawyers themselves.
Thank you very much. Last word, Nirushka. Thank you very much.
Be excited about technology, embrace the opportunities, and never stop learning. Always upskill yourself and stay relevant.
Thank you very much. Time is up. It was an absolutely pleasure working with you, and I hope this wasn't the last seminar and webinar of this topic. Thank you very much for your contributions. Have a nice day, evening here from Brussels. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.